Yesterday, the Federal Reserve announced its sixth interest rate hike this year. Couple that with rising food, gas, and heating costs, and some Americans are planning to forego a traditional Thanksgiving meal this year.
Well, the president chose to ignore rising prices in his speech to the nation last night. 6 days before the midterm elections, he focused on political violence as a threat to democracy in America. Heather Sells has the details.
In a high-profile speech Wednesday night, the president called on Americans to head to the polls and reject those seeking to undermine the elections.
A vote is not a partisan tool to be counted when it helps your candidates and tossed aside when it doesn't.
Citing the attack on House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband, he asked the nation to condemn political violence.
We must, with one overwhelming, unified voice, speak as a country and say there's no place for voter intimidation or political violence in America, whether it's directed at Democrats or Republicans.
Still, he singled out MAGA Republicans and former President Trump for promoting election lies.
He has abused his power and put the loyalty to himself before loyalty to the Constitution.
The president's critics say he has oppressed opposing voices and done little to unify the country.
We have people that feel like their voices are not being heard and they're resorting to violence. A republic does not work that way.
The president barely mentioned what polls show is foremost on voters' minds: rising prices.
They just want to distract from the disasters they created.
Wednesday afternoon, the Federal Reserve announced its sixth interest rate hike this year in an attempt to beat back the highest inflation in decades. As Thanksgiving approaches, turkey prices are up 20% and vegetables 10%. That is leading some Americans to cut back on their celebrations and even forego the traditional feast altogether.
Without price stability, the economy does not work for anyone.
The Fed is trying to achieve a sweet spot, use interest rate hikes to slow the economy enough to lower inflation, but not so much that they trigger a recession. All while keeping in mind the lives of real Americans who are finding it difficult to manage credit card debt or buy a home as interest rates rise.
Mortgage rates are up over 7% for a 30-year fixed, and that's hit housing demand very significantly.
Still, Fed Chair Jerome Powell warned more rate hikes may be coming.
The historical record cautions strongly against prematurely loosening policy. We will stay the course until the job is done.
The Fed could raise rates again when it meets in December. In the meantime, voters must decide which party can best address not only the economy, but our country's political strife. Heather Sells, CBN News.
CBN financial editor Drew Parkill joins us now. So the president is talking about the future of democracy, but what do polls show most voters are concerned about?
Gordon, I was going to bring out a list of polls, but it just got ridiculous. I mean, in every poll, every survey, as Heather mentioned, the economy and inflation are number one. Sometimes in the polls, they split it out and say, what's top for you, inflation or the economy? But when you put them together, especially, it's just way ahead of everything else. Now, Gallup, which is like the premier polling organization, released this in their politics letter just 2 days ago on Tuesday. And here's what they said. We have a graphic here. Current ratings of the U.S. economy and national satisfaction are the lowest Gallup has measured at the time of a midterm election over the life of these polling trends, starting in 1994 and 1982, respectively. And they went on to say congressional and presidential job approval are near their historical low marks. What that means is a few simple words: throw the bums out. And that's what's going on out there. Survey after survey has shown inflation's number one. And look, when people, Gordon, are going to the grocery store, when they're going to the gas station, when they're worried, can I buy new clothes that my kids need, or do I pay the electric bill, or do I buy food, or do we have a Thanksgiving this year? That's what's number one. Everything else is secondary because people's standard of living is going down. So that's the big issue. And the other thing is Republicans can say with justification, Democrats were warned by their own top economists. Larry Summers, Stephen Ratner, Jason Furman, and others said, don't do this. Don't pass this big spending bill that they did in early 2021. They said, it'll lead, in Larry Summers' words, it'll lead to the biggest inflation in a generation. They passed it, and here we are. It didn't create the inflation, but it made it a lot worse.
Well, what about the new spending bill? They just passed a bill to, well, actually, it was an executive action to help low-income Americans with heating bills this year. It seems like every time there's some kind of financial crisis, the response out of Washington seems to be, well, let's print more money. Don't they understand the better thing is to rein in inflation so that you don't have that increase in heating as opposed to let's do more government spending to give away to people?
Well, that's a theory that, in political circles, is that they really don't have answers. Their answer for everything is either some sort of government help or more government spending or more government programs, rather than reining in the spending that caused it in the first place or helped cause it in the first place, as you said. Now, the Democrats will say, oh, inflation's a global phenomenon. Yes, partly, but it has different causes in different places. Here, we would have had inflation anyway, like I said, but they made it worse with the big spending. This heating program is not a huge program, but it's of a piece of their answer to everything, which is constantly spending more, and they're going to pay the price for it, it looks like Tuesday. I'm reading stories, hearing stories, and there are stories out there that hardcore Democratic voters who are lifelong Democrats, et cetera, and so forth, they're voting Republican because they're just fed up, and that Gallup newsletter explains why.
All right. Well, how long is the Fed going to keep raising rates? Chairman Powell seemed to say, we're not going to flinch here. We're going to keep going. So what's your forecast for how many rate increases are we going to see?
He said something extremely important yesterday that was in Heather's story. He said the historical record shows we can't back off. Now, what he was almost certainly talking about was a guy named Arthur Burns, who was the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board from 1970 to 78. He is widely considered by many economists that he could have put the brakes on the inflation that took off in the mid-70s and then came back in the late 70s into the early 80s. And that has spooked many economists since then. Now, some disagree. They don't all think that, but it's a widespread view. And so Powell, when he says history shows you can't back off too early, he's almost certainly referring to Arthur Burns. And now we don't know how long it's going to go on. And he said yesterday, we don't know how long they're going to keep raising rates. But he also said the final level of our rate increases, rates are going to go higher than what we had been thinking. So if inflation's running at 8%, you could see rates going up in the 6-7% range. We don't know, maybe 8 or 9, depending on how long it is till inflation starts to come down.
Well, it's at 7% now. A 30-year mortgage crossed 7%.
Exactly.
So are we looking at late 70s interest rates? I mean, those got to 15%.
Oh, please no. I doubt it seriously because inflation was higher, at least as it was measured then. If we measured it the same way now, it might be higher. But I don't think so. I don't think we're going to get double-digit interest rates. I think the highest we might see would be 8 or 9 or 7 or something. We really don't know, and the Fed doesn't know. They're just going to keep going month by month until they think they've got a handle on things. But it's going to be well into next year. And right now, the bond market is signaling a recession, which hopefully will slow down the economy. They're going to try to avoid a recession. I don't think they will.
Well, back to history. Volcker was the answer to Burns, and he took us to 15. And 10% isn't that far behind 7% at the current rate. We could be there by June. So.
Oh, happy days are here again.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Let's hope not.
Well, Drew, let's hope not. Thanks for the insight.
Sure thing.